for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. We're going to talk about the Trump hush money case. We're also going to talk about the college protests. The college kids are coming out to protest what's happening with Palestinians in Israel. We will talk about that. Hamas says that they will lay down their arms if an independent Palestinian state is established. That's an exclusive interview with the Associated Press. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Arizona's election interference case, so new trouble for Giuliani and some of the other cohorts of Donald Trump. Great news for employees. Non-compete agreements are no more under a new Federal Trade Commission rule. And the FCC is bringing back net neutrality, so more good news for consumers. We'll have that and a lot more. Before we begin with today's topics, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr, southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We post links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We are recording the show on Thursday, April 25th, 2024. Let's go ahead and get to our first story here. This is Jennifer Peltz, Michael R. Sizak, Colleen Long, and Jake Offenhart's writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 25th out of New York City. A reluctant Donald Trump will be back in a New York City courtroom Thursday as his hush money trial resumes at the same time that the U.S. Supreme Court hears arguments in Washington over whether he should be immune from prosecution for actions he took during his time as president. Jurors will hear more witness testimony from a veteran tabloid publisher, and Trump faces a looming decision over whether he violated a gag order imposed by the judge. But he had asked to skip out on his criminal trial for the day so he could sit in on the High Court's special session where the justices will weigh whether he can be prosecuted over his efforts to reverse his 2020 election loss to Joe Biden. During an early morning campaign stop in Manhattan to visit construction workers, I hope they would throw hot rivets at him. That's a trick that the unions used to do to the scabs. Great trick. It needs to happen more. Trump said, quote, "We have a big case today. The judge isn't allowing me to go." End of quote. Oh, boo friggin' who. His request was denied by New York State Supreme Court Judge Juan Merchant, who was overseeing the trial on a hush money scheme that was meant to prevent harmful stories about Trump from surfacing in the final days of the 2016 campaign. Merchant told Trump's lawyer Todd Blanche last week when he nixed the idea, quote, "Arguing before the Supreme Court is a big deal, and I can certainly appreciate why your client would want to be there, but a trial in New York Supreme Court is also a big deal." End of quote. Though 200 miles apart in entirely separate cases, the proceedings Thursday were jumbled together in one big legal and political puzzle that has implications not just for the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, but for the American presidency writ large. I think they meant American presidency at large, but we'll go with what they wrote. In both instances, Trump is trying to get himself out of legal jeopardy as he makes another bid for the White House. But the outcome of the Supreme Court case will have lasting implications for future presidents because the justices will be answering the never-before-asked question of whether and if so, to what extent does a former president enjoy presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for conduct alleged to involve official acts during his tenure in office. The High Court's decision may not impact the New York City case, which hinges mostly on Trump's conduct as a presidential candidate in 2016, not as president. He faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in connection with hush money payments meant to stifle embarrassing stories from surfacing. It is the first of 4 criminal cases against Trump to go before a jury. The New York trial resumes after a scheduled day off with more testimony from the Manhattan District Attorney's first witness, David Pecker, former publisher of the National Enquirer and a longtime friend of Trump's, who pledged to be his eyes and ears during the 2016 presidential campaign. When asked during his campaign appearance Thursday what he thought of Pecker's testimony, Trump said, quote, "David's been very nice, a nice guy," end of quote. Pecker explained to jurors earlier this week how he and the tabloid parlayed rumor-mongering into splashy stories that smeared Trump's opponents and, just as crucially, leveraged his connections to suppress seamy stories about Trump, including a porn actress's claim of an extramarital sexual encounter years earlier. Pecker traced the origins of their relationship to a 1980s meeting at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida, and said the friendship bloomed along the success of the real estate developer's TV show The Apprentice and the program's subsequent celebrity version. Pecker recounted how he promised then-candidate Trump that he would help suppress harmful stories and even arranged to purchase the silence of a doorman. Pecker said of the doorman story that his publication later determined wasn't true, quote, "I made the decision to purchase the story because of the potential embarrassment it had to the campaign and to Mr. Trump," end of quote. Merchant, the judge, may also decide whether or not to hold Trump in contempt and fine him for violating a gag order that barred the GOP leader from making public statements about witnesses, jurors, and others connected to the case. I got a better idea. Don't worry about fining Trump. Worry about jailing Trump. Put his orange ass in jail. 30 days. That's what we would get if we were held in contempt of court. 30 days in the hole. Give it to him. He deserves it. Some of Trump's recent online posts in question included one describing prosecution witnesses Michael Cohen, his former attorney, and Stormy Daniels, the porn actress, as sleazebags, and another repeating a false claim that liberal activists had tried to infiltrate the jury. Trump was dismissive about the upcoming decision. When asked by reporters if he would pay the $1,000 fine for each of 10 posts, he replied, quote, "Oh, I have no idea," end of quote. He then said, quote, "They've taken my constitutional right away with a gag order," end of quote. Oh, really? No, I don't think so. Oh, my God. I am so sick of Trump. Oh, they're taking away my rights, my rights, my rights, my rights. What about everybody else's right? How about the right for all of us to not have to hear your stupid frickin' voice anymore, Donnie? Oh, my God. I can't. When that man dies, I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to toast loud in a bar, and I'm going to say, good riddance to that orange. Don't care. Don't care who I offend. I really don't care anymore. Don't care. Merchant criticized Blanche this week for excusing the post as Trump simply responding to political attacks and commenting on his experience with the criminal justice system. Merchant said, quote, "When your client is violating the gag order, I expect more than one word," end of quote. A conviction by the jury in the hush money probe would not preclude Trump from becoming president again, but because it is a state case, he would not be able to pardon himself if found guilty. The charge is punishable by up to 4 years in prison, though it's not clear if the judge would seek to put him behind bars. Jail him! Put the orange bastard in prison, please! You find him guilty, put him in prison. That's what you do to us. Us as in the little people, not the rich. Rich get their own rules. That's the way it's always been. The rich always get their own rules because guess who writes the rules? Rich people do. The Supreme Court's arguments, meanwhile, are related to charges in federal court in Washington where Trump has been accused of conspiring to overturn the 2020 election. The case stems from Trump's attempts to have charges against him dismissed. Lower courts have found he cannot claim immunity for actions that prosecutors say illegally sought to interfere with the election results. The High Court is moving faster than usual in taking up the case, though not as quickly as Special Counsel Jack Smith wanted, raising questions about whether there will be a time to hold a trial before the November election if the justices agree with lower courts that Trump can be prosecuted. And it's starting to look like they're agreeing with the lower courts. When you got Alito and Sonia Sotomayor pretty much agreeing on the same line of questioning, Trump's orange ass is in deep trouble. And I'm going to love it. I'm going to enjoy it to no end. I will gleefully talk about it every single week on this show. Let me just tell you, Donald Trump is the most dangerous person in this country, period, end of story. He is violent. He is a narcissist. He is a wannabe tin pot dictator. Look who he supports. He supports Putin. He glees about Kim Jong-un. He praises Xi Jinping. Really, he does. Anybody that tells you different is either lying or they don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. That's all there is to it. Yes, I'm talking about my former friend Carrie. Thank you very much. All right, let's get on to our next story. This is Jim Vertuno, Acacia Coronado, and Nick Perry writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 25th out of Austin, Texas. This has to do with pro-Palestinian protests at colleges that is now spreading like wildfire. First it was Columbia University. Now there's protests at the University of Michigan, University of Southern California. They're all over. You're not going to shut the kids up. I'm sorry, you're not going to do it. They have a right to protest. It's under the First Amendment. You might want to look that up, folks. All right, let's get to the story. With graduations looming, student protesters doubled down early Thursday on their discontent of the Israel-Hamas war on campuses across the country as universities, including ones in California and Texas, have become quick to call in the police to end the demonstrations and make arrests. While grappling with growing protests from coast to coast, schools have the added pressure of May commencement ceremonies. At Columbia University of New York, students defiantly erected an encampment where many are set to graduate in front of families in just a few weeks. Columbia continued to negotiate with students after several failed attempts and over 100 arrests to clear the encampment. But several universities ousted demonstrators Wednesday, swiftly turning to law enforcement when protests bubbled up on their campuses. Police peacefully arrested student protesters at the University of Southern California. I don't know about peacefully arrested them. Hours after officers at the University of Texas at Austin aggressively detained dozens in the latest clashes between law enforcement and those protesting the Israel-Hamas war on campuses nationwide. Tensions were already high at USC after the university canceled a planned commencement speech by the school's pro-Palestinian valedictorian, citing safety concerns. After scuffles with police early Wednesday, a few dozen demonstrators standing in a circle with locked arms were detained one by one without incident later in the evening. Officers encircled the dwindling group, sitting in defiance of an earlier warning to disperse or be arrested. Beyond the police line, hundreds of onlookers watched as helicopters buzzed overhead. The school closed the campus. Hours earlier in Texas, hundreds of local and state police, including some on horseback and holding batons, bulldozed into protesters, at one point sending some tumbling onto the street. Officers pushed their way into the crowd and made 34 arrests at the behest of the university and Texas Governor Greg Abbott, according to the State Department of Public Safety. Yeah, Greg Abbott, he's another piece of shit. Needs to be flushed. A photographer covering the demonstration for Fox 7 Austin was in the push and pull when an officer yanked him backward to the ground, the video shows. The station confirmed that the photographer was arrested. A longtime Texas journalist was knocked down in the mayhem and could be seen bleeding before police helped him to emergency medical staff. Dave Urquhart, a third-year Texas student, called the police presence and arrest an overreaction, adding that the protest, quote, would have stayed peaceful, end of quote, if the officers had not turned out in force. Urquhart said, quote, because of all the arrests, I think a lot more demonstrations are going to happen, end of quote. Police left after hours of effort to control the crowd, and about 300 demonstrators moved back in to sit on the grass and chant under the school's iconic clock tower. In a statement Wednesday night, the university president, Jay Hartzell, said, quote, "Our rules matter and they will be enforced. Our university will not be occupied." End of quote. Really? So, the First Amendment rights of these students, right? That's what you're saying. The students. Asshole. North of USC, students at California State Polytechnic University Humboldt were barricaded inside a building for a third day, and the school shut down campus through the weekend and made classes virtual. Harvard University in Massachusetts had sought to stay ahead of protests this week by limiting access to Harvard Yard and requiring permission for tents and tables. That didn't stop protesters from setting up a camp with 14 tents Wednesday following a rally against the university's suspension of the Harvard Undergraduate Palestine Solidarity Committee. Students protesting the Israel-Hamas war are demanding schools cut financial ties to Israel and divest from companies enabling its months-long conflict. Some Jewish students say the protests have veered into anti-Semitism and made them afraid to set foot on campus as graduation nears, partly prompting a heavier hand from universities. Oh, darn, people have the right to protest. Sorry, they do. Now, when it gets into making anti-Semitic remarks, guess what? That's not protected, folks. Just because you protest doesn't mean you're an anti-Semite. Sorry, that's the way it is. At New York University this week, police said 133 protesters were taken into custody. Over 40 protesters were arrested Monday at an encampment at Yale University. Columbia University averted another confrontation between students and police earlier Wednesday. University President Manoush Shafik had set on Tuesday a midnight deadline to reach an agreement on clearing an encampment, but the school extended negotiations for another 48 hours. On a visit to campus Wednesday, U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican, called on Shafik to resign, quote, if she cannot bring order to this chaos, end of quote. He added this, quote, if this is not contained quickly and if these threats and intimidation are not stopped, there is an appropriate time for the National Guard, end of quote. Let me tell you this. Oh, we need to bring in the National Guard. You want another Kent State shooting, Mike? You fucking idiot. That's the worst thing you can do is bring in the National Guard. You want Neil Young to write another song about you, assholes? Go for it. Unbelievable. On Wednesday evening, a Columbia spokesperson said rumors that the university had threatened to bring in the National Guard were unfounded. Ben Chang, Columbia's vice president for communications, said, quote, our focus is to restore order, and if we can get there through dialogue, we will, end of quote. Columbia graduate student Omer Louboutin Granot, who put up pictures of Israeli hostages near the encampment, said he wanted to remind people that there were more than 100 hostages still being held by Hamas. He said, quote, I see all the people behind me advocating for human rights. I don't think they have one word to say about the fact that people their age that were kidnapped from their homes or from a music festival in Israel are held by a terror organization, end of quote. Harvard law student Tala Alafaka, who is Palestinian, said she and other protesters want more transparency from the university. She said, quote, my hope is that the Harvard administration listens to what its students have been asking for all year, which is divestment, disclosure, and dropping any sort of charges against students, end of quote. On Wednesday, about 60 tents remained at the Columbia encampment, which appeared calm. Security remained tight around campuses with identification required and police setting up metal barricades. Columbia said it had agreed with protest representatives that only students would remain at the encampment and they would make it welcoming, banning discriminatory or harassing language. So Columbia trying to dispel it without getting the National Guard involved. Mike Johnson needs to be removed from Congress, period, end of story. Matter of fact, all the Republicans need to be removed from Congress. They need to be put on a frickin' rocket and sent to the sun. You want my opinion? Oh, I would. Oh, if I had the power of Talos from the Marvel comic series, one snap of my fingers and all the Republicans be gone. All of them. Off to some parallel universe or whatever. Don't care. Don't care anymore. Let me get to our next story here. This is Abby Sewell writing for the Associated Press out of Istanbul, Turkey. This is dated April 25th. A top Hamas political official told the Associated Press that the Islamic militant group is willing to agree to a truce of 5 years or more with Israel, and that it would lay down its weapons and convert into a political party if an independent Palestinian state is established along pre-1967 borders. The comments by Khalil al-Hayya in an interview Wednesday came amid a stalemate in months of talks for a ceasefire in Gaza. The suggestion that Hamas would disarm appeared to be a significant concession by the militant group officially committed to Israel's destruction. But it's unlikely Israel would consider such a scenario. It has vowed to crush Hamas following the deadly October 7th attacks that triggered the war, and its current leadership is adamantly opposed to the creation of a Palestine state on lands Israel captured in the 1967 Mideast War. Al-Hayya, a high-ranking Hamas official who has represented the Palestinian militants in negotiations for a ceasefire and hostage exchange, struck a sometimes defiant and other times conciliatory tone. Speaking to the Associated Press in Istanbul, Al-Hayya said Hamas wants to join the Palestinian Liberation Organization headed by the rival Fatah faction to form a unified government for Gaza and the West Bank. He said Hamas would accept, quote, a fully sovereign Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip and the return of Palestinian refugees in accordance with the international resolutions, end of quote, along Israel's pre-1967 borders. If that happens, he said the group's military wing would dissolve. He added, quote, all the experiences of people who fought against occupiers when they became independent and obtained their rights in their state, what have these forces done? They have turned into political parties, and their defending fighting forces have turned into the national army, end of quote. Over the years, Hamas has sometimes moderated its public position with respect to the possibility of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. But its political program still officially, quote, rejects any alternative to the full liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, end of quote, referring to the area reaching from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which includes lands that now make up Israel. Al-Hayya did not say whether his apparent embrace of a two-state solution would amount to an end to the Palestinian conflict with Israel or an interim step toward the group's stated goal of destroying Israel. There was no immediate reaction from Israel or the Palestinian Authority, the internationally recognized self-rule government that Hamas drove out when it seized Gaza in 2007, a year after winning Palestinian parliamentary elections. After the Hamas takeover of Gaza, the Palestinian Authority was left with administrating semi-autonomous pockets of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Authority hopes to establish an independent state in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, areas captured by Israel in the 1967 Mideast War. While the international community overwhelmingly supports such a two-state solution, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's hardline government rejects it. Let me add, conservative, MAGA, hardline government. Benjamin Netanyahu is nothing more than Israel's version of Donald John Trump. Period. End of story. The war in Gaza has dragged on for nearly 7 months and ceasefire negotiations have stalled. The war began with the deadly October 7th attack on southern Israel in which Hamas-led militants killed about 1,200 people, mostly civilians. Militants dragged some 250 hostages into the enclave. The ensuing Israeli bombardment and ground offensive in Gaza has killed more than 34,000 Palestinians, most of them women and children, according to local health authorities, and displaced some 80% of Gaza's population of 2.3 million. Israel is now preparing for an offensive in the southern city of Rafah, where more than 1 million Palestinians have fled to. Israel says it has dismantled most of the initial 24 Hamas battalions since the start of the war, but that the 4 remaining ones are holed up in Rafah. Israel argues that a Rafah offensive is necessary to achieve victory over Hamas. Al-Hayya said such an offensive would not succeed in destroying Hamas. He said contacts between the political leadership outside and military leadership inside Gaza are uninterrupted by the war and, quote, contacts, decisions, and directions are made in consultation, end of quote, between the two groups. He asserted that Israeli forces, quote, have not destroyed more than 20% of Hamas's capabilities, neither human nor in the field. If they can't finish us off, what is the solution? The solution is to go to consensus, end of quote. In November, a week-long ceasefire saw the release of more than 100 hostages in exchange for 240 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. But talks for a longer-term truce and release of the remaining hostages are now frozen, with each side accusing the other of intransigence. Key interlocutor Qatar has said in recent days that it is undertaking a reassessment of its role as mediator. Most of Hamas's top political officials previously based in Qatar have left the Gulf country in the past week and traveled to Turkey, where Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh met with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Saturday, or Erdogan, I should say. Al-Hayya denied a permanent move of the group's main political offices in the works and said Hamas wants to see Qatar continue in its capacity as mediator in the talks. Israeli and U.S. officials have accused Hamas of not being serious about a deal. Al-Hayya denied this, saying Hamas has made concessions regarding the number of Palestinian prisoners it wants released in exchange for the remaining Israeli hostages. He said the group does not know exactly how many hostages remain in Gaza and are still alive. But he said Hamas will not back down from its demands for a permanent ceasefire and full withdrawal of Israeli troops, both of which Israel has balked at. Israel says it will continue military operations until Hamas is definitely defeated and will retain a security presence in Gaza afterwards. Of the remaining hostages, the Hamas leader said, quote, if we are not assured the war will end, why would I hand over the prisoners? End of quote. Al-Hayya also implicitly threatened that Hamas would attack Israeli or other forces who might be stationed around a floating pier the U.S. is scrambling to build along Gaza's coastline to deliver aid by sea. He said, quote, we categorically reject any non-Palestinian presence in Gaza, whether at sea or on land, and we will deal with any military force present in these places, Israeli or otherwise, as an occupying power, end of quote. Al-Hayya said Hamas does not regret the October 7th attacks, despite the destruction it has brought down on Gaza and its people. He denied that Hamas militants had targeted civilians during the attacks, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, and said the operation succeeded in its goal of bringing the Palestinian issue back to the world's attention. And he said for Israeli attempts to eradicate Hamas would ultimately fail to prevent future Palestinian armed uprisings. He asked, quote, let's say that they have destroyed Hamas. Are the Palestinian people gone? End of quote. Well, that's what Israel really wants, is to get rid of all the Palestinians. They are engaged in a genocide. When they're killing entire families, that's genocide, folks. Got news for you, and that's a war crime. Israel ought to know 6 million Jews were exterminated during World War II in Germany. Not to mention the other 14 million people that the Germans killed. Gypsies, Catholics, people of LGBTQ backgrounds, you name it. It's maddening, folks. It's maddening. When you get conservative politicians in office, you're going to get wars. That's all there is. History proves this. Unbelievable. You folks need to figure this out. All right, let's get into our next story here. Let's get into some more election interference news. This is Jock Billiod, Josh Coletti, and Jonathan J. Cooper writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 24th out of Phoenix. An Arizona grand jury has indicted Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, lawyer Rudy Giuliani, and 16 others for their roles in an attempt to overturn Trump's loss to Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Again, the Associated Press refers to Donald Trump as former president. We don't do that on this show. Not now, not ever. The indictment released Wednesday names 11 Republicans who submitted a document to Congress falsely declaring that Trump won Arizona in 2020. They include the former state party chair, a 2022 U.S. Senate candidate, and 2 sitting state lawmakers who are charged with 9 counts each of conspiracy, fraud, and forgery. The identities of 7 other defendants, including Giuliani and Meadows, were not immediately released because they had not yet been served with the documents. They were readily identifiable based on descriptions of the defendants, however. Trump himself was not charged but was referred to as an unindicted co-conspirator. Unindicted for now. Maybe he'll get indicted. 5 court cases. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Hey, if you get 5, you get an extra stamp. The 6th one is free. With the indictments, Arizona becomes the 4th state where allies of Donald Trump have been charged with using false or unproven claims about voter fraud related to the election. Heading into a likely November rematch with Biden, Trump continues to spread lies about the last election that are echoed by many of his supporters. In a video released by her office, Democratic State Attorney General Chris Mays said, quote, "I will not allow American democracy to be undermined. It's too important." End of quote. The indictment alludes to Giuliani as an attorney who was often identified as the mayor and spread false allegations of election fraud. Another defendant is referred to as Trump's chief of staff in 2020, which describes Meadows. Descriptions of other unnamed defendants point to Mike Roman, who was Trump's director of Election Day operations, John Eastman, a lawyer who devised a strategy to try to persuade Congress not to certify the election, and Christina Bobb, a lawyer who worked with Giuliani. A lawyer for Eastman, Charles Burnham, said his client is innocent. Really? Guilty. Guilty as charged, my opinion. Bob did not respond to a text message seeking comment, nor did a lawyer who is representing Roman in a case in Georgia. George Terwilliger, a lawyer representing Meadows, said he has not yet seen the indictment, but if Meadows is named, quote, "It is a blatantly political and politicized accusation and will be contested and defeated." End of quote. Giuliani's political advisor, Ted Goodman, decried what he called, quote, "the continued weaponization of our justice system." End of quote. The 11 people who had been nominated to be Arizona's Republican electors met in Phoenix on December 14th, 2020, to sign a certificate saying they were duly elected and qualified electors and claiming that Trump carried the state. A 1-minute video of the signing ceremony was posted on social media by the Arizona Republican Party at the time. The document was later sent to Congress and the National Archives, where it was ignored. Biden won Arizona by more than 10,000 votes. Of the 8 lawsuits that unsuccessfully challenged Biden's victory in the state, one was filed by the 11 Republicans. Their lawsuit asked the judge to decertify the results that gave Biden his victory in Arizona and blocked the state from sending them to the Electoral College. In dismissing the case, U.S. District Judge Diane Humatiwa said the Republicans lacked legal standing, waited too long to bring their case, and, quote, failed to provide the court with factual support for their extraordinary claims, end of quote. Days after that lawsuit was dismissed, the 11 participated in the certificate signing. The Arizona charges come after a string of indictments against fake electors in other states. In December, a Nevada grand jury indicted 6 Republicans on felony charges of offering a false instrument for filing and uttering a forged instrument in connection with false election certificates. They have pleaded not guilty. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel in July filed felony charges that included forgery and conspiracy to commit election forgery against 16 Republican fake electors. One had charges dropped after reaching a cooperation deal. The 15 remaining defendants have pleaded not guilty. 3 fake electors have also been charged in Georgia alongside Trump and others in a sweeping indictment accusing them of participating in a wide-ranging scheme to illegally overturn the results. They have pleaded not guilty. In Wisconsin, 10 Republicans who posed as electors settled a civil lawsuit admitting their actions were part of an effort to overturn Biden's victory. There is no known criminal investigation in Wisconsin, but there might be an unknown one. Wouldn't that be nice? Trump was indicted in August in federal court over efforts to cling to power after his defeat, including the fake electors scheme. The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday will hear arguments on his claim in that case that he can't be prosecuted for actions he committed while serving as president. Yeah. In early January, New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres said the state's 5 Republican electors cannot be prosecuted under the current law. In New Mexico and Pennsylvania, fake electors added a caveat saying the election certificate was submitted in case they were later recognized as duly elected qualified electors. No charges have been filed in Pennsylvania. In Arizona, Mays' predecessor, Republican Mark Brnovich, conducted an investigation of the 2020 election, but the fake elector allegations were not part of that examination, according to Mays' office. The so-called fake electors facing charges include Kelly Ward, the state's Republican chair from 2019 until early 2023, State Senator Jake Hoffman, Tyler Boyer, an executive of the conservative youth organization Turning Point USA, who serves on the Republican National Committee, State Senator Anthony Kern, who was photographed in restricted areas outside the U.S. Capitol during the January 6, 2021 traitorous attack, and he is now a candidate in Arizona's 8th Congressional District. Greg Safston, a former executive director of the Arizona Republican Party, energy industry executive James Lehman, who lost a 2022 Republican primary for a U.S. Senate seat, Robert Montgomery, chairman of the Cochise County Republican Committee in 2020, Samuel Moorhead, a Republican precinct committee member in Gila County, Nancy Cottle, who in 2020 was the first vice president of the Arizona Federation of Republican Women, Lorraine Pellegrino, past president of the Ahwatukee Republican Women, and Michael Ward, an osteopathic physician who is married to Kelly Ward. In a statement, Hoffman accused Mays of weaponizing the Attorney General's office in bringing the case, but didn't directly comment on the indictment's allegations. Hoffman said, quote, "Let me be unequivocal. I am innocent of any crime. I will vigorously defend myself, and I look forward to the day when I am vindicated of this naked political persecution by the judicial process." End of quote. None of the others responded to either phone, email, or social media messages from the Associated Press seeking comment. So there you go, folks. They're going down. They're all going to go down, and I'm going to enjoy it. And like I said, I'm going to toast. I'm going to toast loud and obnoxious as I can. Let's get to our next story. This is Christopher Rugaber writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 24th out of Washington, D.C. We finally have some good news, folks. Some great news. This is going to happen. U.S. companies will no longer be able to bar employees from taking jobs with competitors under a rule approved by a federal agency Tuesday, though the rule is sure to be challenged in court. The Federal Trade Commission voted Tuesday 3-2 to ban measures known as non-compete agreements, which bar workers from jumping to or starting competing companies for a prescribed period of time. According to the Federal Trade Commission, 30 million people, roughly 1 in 5 workers, are now subject to such restrictions. The Biden administration has taken aim at non-compete measures which are commonly associated with high-level executives at technology and financial companies, but in recent years have also ensnared low-paid workers such as security guards and sandwich shop employees. Let me add radio disc jockeys and television news personalities. They're under non-competes too in most cases. Let me just tell you. A 2021 study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis found that more than 1 in 10 workers who earn $20 or less an hour are covered by non-compete agreements. When it proposed the ban in January 2023, Federal Trade Commission officials asserted that non-compete agreements harm workers by reducing their ability to switch jobs for higher pay, a step that often provides most workers with their biggest pay increases. By reducing overall churn in the job market, the agency argued, the measures also disadvantage workers who aren't covered by them because fewer jobs become available as fewer people leave their positions. They can also hurt the economy overall by limiting the ability of other businesses to hire needed employees. That's according to the FTC. The rule, which does not apply to workers at nonprofits, is to take effect in 4 months unless it is blocked by legal challenges. FTC Chair Lena Khan said, quote, non-compete clauses keep wages lower, suppress new ideas, and rob the American economy of dynamism. We've heard from employees who, because of non-competes, were stuck in abusive workplaces. End of quote. She added that some doctors have been prevented from practicing medicine after leaving practices. Business groups have criticized the measure as casting too wide a net by blocking nearly all non-competes. They argue that highly paid executives are often able to win greater pay in return for accepting a non-compete. No, that's not true. Bullshit. Amanda Sonneborn, a partner at King and Spalding in Chicago who represents employers that use non-competes, said, quote, "It'll represent a sea change. They don't want somebody to go to a competitor and take their customer list or take their information about their business strategy to that competitor," end of quote. But Alexander Hurdle Fernandez, a professor at Columbia University who is a former Biden administration Labor Department official, argued that lower-income workers don't have the ability to negotiate over such provisions. He said, quote, "When they get their job offer, it's really a take it or leave it as a whole," end of quote. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce said Tuesday that it will file a lawsuit to block the rule. Well, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It accused the FTC of overstepping its authority. The Chamber CEO Suzanne Clark said, quote, "Non-compete agreements are either upheld or dismissed under well-established state laws governing their use. Yet today, 3 unelected commissioners have unilaterally decided that they have the authority to declare what's a legitimate business decision and what's not by moving to ban non-compete agreements in all sectors of the economy," end of quote. Oh, tough for you, lady. Got news for you. And it was voted on party lines. 2 Republican appointees to the FTC, Melissa Holyoke and Andrew Ferguson, voted against the proposal. They asserted that the agency was exceeding its authority by approving such a sweeping rule. Non-compete agreements are banned in 3 states, including California, and some opponents of non-competes argue that California's ban has been a key contributor to that state's innovative tech economy. John Lettieri, CEO of the Economic Innovation Group, a tech-backed think tank, argues that the ability of early innovators to leave one company and start a competitor was key to the development of the semiconductor industry. Lettieri said, quote, "The birth of so many important foundational companies could not have happened, at least not in the same way or on the same timeline, and definitely not in the same place, had it not been for the ability of entrepreneurs to spin out, start their own companies, or go to a better company," end of quote. The White House has been stepping up its efforts to protect workers as the presidential campaign heats up. On Tuesday, the Labor Department issued a rule that would guarantee overtime pay for more lower-paid workers. The rule would increase the required minimum salary level to exempt an employee from overtime pay from about $35,600 currently to nearly $43,900 effective July 1st and $58,700 by January 1st of 2025. Companies will be required to pay overtime for workers below those thresholds who work more than 40 hours a week. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su said, quote, "This rule will restore the promise to workers that if you work more than 40 hours in a week, you should be paid more for that time," end of quote. Here's what I've got to say about it. It's about time the FTC got on this. And I'm real quickly going to mention that the Federal Communications Commission on a 3-2 rule just voted on Thursday to bring back the Obama-era rule about throttling down internet speeds. So there you go. Internet providers are going to have to provide the same speed to everybody. The net neutrality. Beautiful. More applause. I love it. This is great news. This is really great for everybody. Right now, let's get to our next story here. This may not be good for some people. This is Wyatt Grantham Phillips writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 25th out of New York. Legislation forcing TikTok's parent company to sell the video sharing platform or face a ban in the U.S. received President Joe Biden's official sign-off Wednesday. But the newly minted law could be in for an uphill battle in court. Critics of the sell or be banned ultimatum argue it violates TikTok users' First Amendment rights. The app's China-based owner, ByteDance, has already promised to sue, calling the measure unconstitutional. But a court challenge's success is not guaranteed. The law's opponents, which include advocacy organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, maintain that the government hasn't come close to justifying banning TikTok, while others say national security claims could still prevail. For years, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have expressed concerns that Chinese authorities could force ByteDance to hand over U.S. user data or influence Americans by suppressing or promoting certain content on TikTok. The U.S. has yet to provide public evidence to support those claims, but some legal experts note that political pressures have piled up regardless. If upheld, legal experts also stress that the law could set a precedent carrying wider ramifications for digital media in the U.S. Here's what you need to know. Is a TikTok ban unconstitutional? That's the central question. TikTok and opponents of the law have argued that a ban would violate First Amendment rights of the social media platform's 170 million U.S. users. Patrick Toomey, deputy director of the ACLU's National Security Project, said a TikTok ban would, quote, stifle free expression and restrict public access, end of quote, to a platform that has become central source for information sharing. Among key questions will be whether the legislation interferes with the overall content of speech on TikTok. That's according to Elettra Bietti, an assistant professor of law and computer science at Northeastern University, because content-based restrictions meet a higher level of scrutiny. ByteDance had yet to officially file a lawsuit by late Wednesday, but Bietti said she expects the company's challenge to primarily focus on whether a ban infringes on these wider free speech rights. She added that additional litigation involving TikTok's commercial actors, such as businesses and influencers who make their living on the platform, may also arise. Let me add that so many political candidates have a presence on TikTok, yet these are the same people that are saying we need to ban it. Hypocrites. Yep, and that includes Biden. Hypocrite. Could TikTok successfully prevent the ban in court? TikTok is expressing confidence about the prospects of its planned challenge. TikTok CEO Shou Chu said in a video response posted to X on Wednesday, quote, rest assured we aren't going anywhere. The facts and the Constitution are on our side and we expect to prevail again, end of quote. Toomey also said that he is optimistic about the possibility of TikTok being able to block the measure in court, noting that both users and the company have extremely strong First Amendment claims. Toomey added, quote, many of the calls to completely ban TikTok in the U.S. are about scoring political points and rooted in anti-China sentiment. And to date, these steps to ban TikTok have not been remotely supported by concrete public evidence. You got that right. Still, the future of any litigation is hard to predict, especially for this kind of case. And from a legal perspective, legal experts say it can be difficult to cite political motivations even if they're well documented as grounds to invalidate a law. The battle could also string along for some time with the potential for appeals that could go all the way to the Supreme Court, which would likely uphold the law due to its current composition, said Gus Hurwitz, senior fellow at University of Pennsylvania's Carey Law School. How might the government respond to the challenge? TikTok's legal challenge won't go on without a fight. The government will probably respond with national security claims, which were already cited prominently as the legislation made its way through Congress. Toomey maintains that the government hasn't met the high bar required to prove imminent national security risks, but some other legal experts note that it's still a strong card to play. Hurwitz said, quote, one of the unfortunate and really frustrating things about national security legislation is that it tends to be a trump card. Once national security issues come up, they're going to carry the day either successfully or not, end of quote. Hurwitz added that he thinks there are legitimate national security arguments that could be brought up here. National security can be argued because it's a federal measure, he added. That sets this scenario apart from previous unsuccessful state-level legislation seeking to ban TikTok, such as in Montana. But national security arguments are also vulnerable to questioning as to why TikTok is getting specific scrutiny. Pointing to tech giants ranging from Google to Amazon, Bietti said, quote, personally, I believe that what TikTok does isn't that different from other companies that are U.S.-based. Why ban TikTok and not the activities and the surveillance carried out by other companies in the U.S.? End of quote. Could there be wider ramifications if the law is upheld? Still, legal experts note that there could be repercussions beyond TikTok in the future. The measure was passed as part of a larger $95 billion package that provides aid to Ukraine and Israel. The package also includes a provision that makes it illegal for data brokers to sell or rent personally identifiable sensitive data to North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, or entities in those countries. That has encountered some pushback, including from the ACLU, which says the language is written too broadly and could sweep in journalists and others who publish personal information. Toomey said, quote, "There's real reason to be concerned that the use of this law will not stop with TikTok. Looking at that point in the bigger picture, banning TikTok or forcing its sale would be a devastating blow to the U.S. government's decades of work promoting an open and secure global internet." End of quote. I have to agree with the ACLU on this one. If there's proof that there's a national security threat, you need to show the proof to the U.S. people. We deserve to know. That's all there is to it. We deserve to know. Speaking of the First Amendment, oh my goodness. We had a Donnybrook in Ottawa County just this past week. This is Mitchell Boatman writing for the Holland Sentinel. This is dated April 24th. Ottawa County Commissioner Jacob Bonema was trying to get the attention of the Ottawa County Board Chair, saying, quote, Mr. Chair, Joe Moss, end of quote. Bonema wanted to know the real name of the self-described Satanist about to give the traditional invocation. It was an odd night in Ottawa County, though certainly not the oddest since Moss's PAC Ottawa Impact won the board's majority in August 2022. The planned invocation from the Satanic Temple of West Michigan, scheduled several months after a lawsuit led the board to develop new policies for accepting invocation requests, drew hundreds to the Fillmore complex on Tuesday. About 2 hours in, Bonema walked out. The Satanic Temple of West Michigan announced in March they'd been scheduled to give the meeting's prayer April 23rd. The meeting drew one of the largest crowds the board has seen since Ottawa Impact commissioners took office in January 2023. Hundreds gathered in the lobby and in the front of the Fillmore complex. Many stood in small groups to pray, sing hymns, and hold signs opposed to the Satanic Party. Attendees in the lobby continued to sing through the start of the meeting, including during the invocation. Bonema claimed the invocation speaker, Reverend Louis Cipher, was using a pseudonym. Bonema asked, quote, "So now we're allowing people to address us that we don't know their name?" End of quote. Let me say this to Jacob Bonema. If I was to go in front of the Ottawa board and I used the name Joe Smith, how would you know that I'm using a pseudonym? Huh? Sorry, people have the right to speak. They have the right to hide their identity, too, for obvious reasons. Because you're a bunch of nut jobs over in Ottawa County. Violent, evil, conservative nut jobs. Moss told Bonema not to interrupt or the meeting would go into recess. Bonema left during public comment. He told the Holland Sentinel, quote, "I had enough of the endless, unproductive dramatics. When they decide to do actual business of the county again, I will be there with bells on." End of quote. Really? And what business of the county would you be doing? Would that be cutting the funding for the health department a little more? Getting rid of food services for senior people who are hungry? Because that's what you've done. It was a scene set in part by OI Commissioner's own staunch Christian beliefs. Let me add right-wing Christian beliefs. The invocation has also been given by Bart Spencer, senior pastor of the Lighthouse Baptist Church, who made headlines early in the pandemic when he encouraged his congregation to contract the virus to, quote, "get it over with," end of quote. Reverend Jared Kramer of St. John's Episcopal Church in Grand Haven filed a federal lawsuit in October 2023, claiming Moss used his position as chair to, quote, "endorse a particular set of religious beliefs and exclude a particular set of religious beliefs," end of quote. In response to the lawsuit, the board created an invocation policy which states any religious leader or individual who wishes to be added to the speakers list must make a formal request in writing to the commissioner who represents the district in which they reside. The requests are then forwarded to a county-employed coordinator who curates the schedule. All requests are treated on a first-come, first-served basis. Kramer, a vocal opponent of Ottawa Impact, was allowed to give his invocation in February, but what could have been a step toward reconciliation was placed in jeopardy after Commissioner Roger Belknap displayed a political sign to protest Kramer's known support of the LGBTQ+ community. Then in March, the announcement came from the Satanic Temple, putting those new invocation policies to the test. Cipher, minister of Satan and lifelong resident of Ottawa County, gave an invocation which, including an introductory statement, lasted about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Ottawa Impact Commissioners Gretchen Cosby and Kendra Wenzel prayed to themselves during the invocation. Prior to the meeting, Commissioner Rebecca Kern handed out heart-shaped cookies with John 3:16 stickers on the packaging. Oh, brother, listen to that. Oh. During the roll call following the invocation, Belknap answered, quote, Lord willing, I am here, end of quote. Lord willing, I wish you weren't there. I wish you were back home, retired. When the meeting moved to public comment, Kern was the first speaker. She offered a prayer from the lectern. She wasn't alone in religious messaging. Of the 45 people who spoke during the first public comment period, about 24 gave Christian messages, denounced the invocation, or read passages from a Bible. A speaker named Paula from Spring Lake said, quote, in the name of Jesus, I cast down any words or curses spoken not of you, Lord. We rebuke it in Jesus' name. End of quote. Oh, brother. Keep your Christianity the absolute away from politics. Separation of church and state, folks. Oh, my God, these people. A speaker from Georgetown Township who held a wooden cross as he spoke said the county made a grievous error in allowing Tuesday's invocation. He said the board allowed worship to a false idol and reparation must be made. I'm not kidding. One speaker from Hamilton said, quote, I do not believe in the separation of church and state, end of quote. Another from Chester Township claimed falsely that only Christianity is protected by the First Amendment. Oh, that one deserves a double right there. That deserves a double. Why not? I'm giving it a triple. Bullshit. Read your Constitution, people. Others thanked the board for allowing the invocation and supporting First Amendment rights. There you go. That's the way you do it. Commenters came not only from Ottawa County, but Allegan, Muskegon, and Kent as well. Bender Bones, an ordained minister of the Satanic Temple, first approached the board in May 2023 after commissioners voted to make Ottawa a constitutional county. The Satanic Temple is not about literal devil worshiping, representatives say. Instead, it uses satanic imagery to support egalitarianism, social justice, and the separation of church and state, supporting its mission, quote, to encourage benevolence and empathy among all people, end of quote. That's according to the National Group's website. Bones previously told the Sentinel, quote, we are advocates for critical thinking, pluralism, compassion, empathy, conforming our beliefs to scientific understanding, the struggle for justice. A lot of altruistic kind of deals are wrapped into all of that, end of quote. The Satanic Temple has utilized satire, theatrical ploys, humor, and legal action in its public campaigns to generate attention and, quote, prompt people to reevaluate fears and perceptions, end of quote, and to, quote, highlight religious hypocrisy and encroachment on religious freedom, end of quote. Bingo! In his own prayer, February 13th, Kramer directly referenced previous actions of the board he, too, found problematic, including changing the motto and closing the county's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department. Kramer has since amended his complaint against the board, arguing Belknap's display undercut the county's own stated defense that commissioners didn't take issue with Kramer or his beliefs. Well, obviously they did, because they allowed Belknap to put that sign up during the invocation. I hope he sues and I hope he wins a lot of money. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.